And let me thank the members of the UAW who are with us tonight. I want to introduce them now, and then I'm going to say a few words, and then you're going to hear from the workers themselves, and then we're going to have an informal discussion. I'm going to throw out some questions. Let's start off with Shawn Fain. Shawn has been a member of the UAW for 29 years, getting his start in 1994 as an electrician for Chrysler in his hometown of Kokomo, Indiana. And Shawn has held a number of positions within the UAW, and in March was elected president of that union, one of the great unions in America. And that was the first time the UAW had a direct election where the members actually were able to vote. Before, they had a complicated kind of top-down system. This is the first time it was opened up, and Shawn won that. And since he has been in office, Shawn has made it clear that he is prepared to stand up for corporate greed and fight for the rank and file of the UAW and for the retirees as well. So you're going to hear from Shawn in a minute. I also look forward to hearing from Michelle Collins. Michelle is a member of the UAW Local 977 from Kokomo. She has worked as a skilled trades machine repair in production for 23 years with General Motors, having been relocated from several plants in Indiana to Tennessee and then back to Indiana. Michelle is unsure if she will be able to afford to retire. And that's a concern that millions and millions of workers throughout this country have, not just automobile workers. She is concerned about whether she will have the health insurance she needs when she retires. And she is concerned about her son, the future of her son who works at Chrysler and today does not have a pension. So this whole issue of pensions is a big deal we're going to talk about. For you who are younger, who take it for granted, oh, I got a job, pensions are unheard of. There was once a time, and Shawn will speak to this in a moment, where pensions were part of what millions and millions of workers got as part of the contracts they negotiated, and in some cases, non-union workers as well. So we're going to hear from Michelle in a minute. We're going to hear from Jermaine Lamb. Jermaine is a member of UAW Local 12 from Toledo. Jermaine has worked in the Jeep unit of Stellantis in Toledo, Ohio, since 2013. After spending 8 years in the Navy, he is a mechanic engineer who works 9-hour shifts, 6 days a week, and still is having a tough time affording to raise his kids at the quality of life he would like. So we're going to hear from Jermaine in a minute. We're also going to hear from Sarah Chambers, who is a member of UAW Local 182 from Livonia, Michigan. Sarah has been with Ford Company for 17 years, starting as a temporary worker for 6 years and only being hired as a regular employee 11 years ago. And that's an issue we're also going to talk about tonight, because what the auto companies are doing is they're hiring people as quote-unquote temps, not for 3 weeks, not for 6 months, but year after year after year, and the temps get substantially lower wages and benefits that permanent employees get. And last but not least, we're going to hear from Sarah Chambers. Sarah is a member of UAW Local. I'm sorry, we just introduced Sarah, and Sarah will be our last speaker. Okay, so that's where we are. Let me just say a few words, and that is by thanking all of the UAW members for being with us tonight. The UAW is in the process now of entering negotiations for a new union contract with the big three auto companies, and are prepared and are working hard to take on the unprecedented corporate greed that we see not only in the automobile industry, but we see in industry after industry after industry. These guys, heads of large corporations, make huge compensation packages, corporate profits are soaring, they do stock buybacks, dividends are strong, and yet they try to squeeze the workers who they employ every single day. So I mentioned a moment ago, there was once a time, some 40 years ago, when union auto jobs were considered the gold standard for blue-collar workers throughout this country. Those were the guys who had the best wages, best working conditions, best pensions. That was then, sadly, tragically, that is no longer the case. Not only for auto workers, not only for UAW members, but for workers all across this country. In fact, in many ways, we are moving backwards, not forward. In America today, tens of thousands of UAW workers are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And far too many of them are making totally inadequate wages and receiving inadequate benefits. Meanwhile, how are the big three auto companies and their CEOs doing? Workers are getting squeezed. What about the guys on top? The truth of the matter is they have never had it so good. Over the past decade, General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis have made $250 billion in profit over the last decade. Over the past 6 months of this year, these same three companies made $21 billion in profits, up 80% from the same time period last year. And they're busy telling the workers, oh, we just don't have enough money to treat you with respect. Last year, the big three auto companies spent $9 billion not to improve the lives of their workers, not to make their factories safer, but on stock buybacks and dividends to make their wealthy executives and stockholders even richer. So while auto workers and the big three are making less money in real dollars today than they did 15 years ago, their CEOs received a 40% raise over the past 4 years. And frankly, I think most Americans are catching on that that type of greed is unacceptable, and it is really one of the very, very serious problems that we face in this country. That corporate greed is something we've got to deal with. Now, the good news is that the UAW is standing up. They're fighting back, and they're saying loudly and clearly that enough is enough. They are demanding a new union contract that is fair and that is just. If the big three can make record-breaking profits, then the auto workers in this country who are responsible for those profits can and should also receive record-breaking benefits and wages. Now, what does all of that mean? It means that if the big three can afford to give a 40% pay raise to their CEOs, they can afford to provide the same type of pay raise for their workers who make their products. These guys don't get rich by accident. They get rich by the hard work of the people we're going to be hearing from tonight. It means ending the disastrous two-tier wage and benefit system that treats new workers and temps as second-class citizens. And that is an issue that unions all across this country are fighting back on. They understand that if workers work side by side, they deserve equal wages. It also means restoring cost of living adjustments so that the pay for auto workers keeps pace with inflation. It means making sure that all auto workers receive a defined benefit pension plan and strong retiree health benefits so that they can retire with the respect and the dignity they deserve. Half of the people in this country today have nothing in the bank when they retire. And they're dependent on Social Security, and they see on TV all these Republicans trying to cut Social Security. Workers deserve decent pensions, so that's what the UAW is fighting for. It also means making sure that auto workers have the right to strike over plant closures. It is unacceptable that the big three have shut down 65 factories over the past 20 years. And it means demanding that General Motors fold the Ultium battery plant into the national UAW contract so that the workers at this plant receive the decent wages and benefits that other UAW workers receive. So that is where we are right now. As we transition away from fossil fuels and move to renewable energy, as all of you know, climate change is a major, major crisis. We need workers who are going to help us move to energy efficient vehicles. So that is exactly what the UAW folks are doing. So we believe that if the federal government is putting money into plants that are producing products that will help us transition to sustainable energy. The federal government is putting money into those plants. Those companies have got to provide their employees with decent wages and benefits. You can't take federal money and then provide starvation wages to your workers. So with that, those are some of the issues out there. I know Shawn has a lot more to say. So let me introduce Shawn Fain, the newly elected president of the UAW. Shawn, thanks so much for being with us and for the great work you are doing.
As always, thank you, Barney, and welcome. And on behalf of our membership, on behalf of our bargaining committees, on behalf of our leadership, on behalf of the UAW in general, I just want to say, that we're organized right now like we've never been, and we have one objective here, and that is to fight corporate greed. Recently, it's ironic. I've heard talking heads saying our contract demands are class warfare. That's laughable. I see you laughing already, Bernie.
I am laughing because that is what we have experienced for 40 years, except the wrong class keeps winning. And it's time now for the working class to move forward.
You bet. And that's where I was going with this. They are right. Class warfare has been going on for 40 years, and the rich keep getting richer and the middle class keeps disappearing. And, what that's led to is we have an economy now, a world now where 26 billionaires, 26 people have as much wealth as half of humanity. And we have the big three CEOs who in just the last 4 years alone have increased their salaries by 40%. Their salaries were already way out of control. And it is shameful that as we speak today, the GM CEO, with 1 week of her salary, she is making what a newly hired worker at Altium Battery Plant in Lordstown, Ohio, they would have to work 16 years to make what she makes in 1 year or 1 week. 16 years of work to make what the CEO makes in a week. It is criminal what's going on. So we have a crisis in this country, and it's time the working class gets their share. And I heard it said recently, one of my favorite quotes I've heard in the last few months, that companies want to socialize their losses in bad times and privatize their gains in good times. And it's never been more evident in the big three. In the worst of times during the economic recession, the UAW workers were blamed for the brunt of everything that was wrong with these corporations. And that was a complete falsehood. It was a lie. And back in those times, our workers took the brunt of all the sacrifices that were made. And yet, here we are 14 years later, after a decade of high profits and continued record profits, in the best of times, now we're being called greedy because our workers just want their fair share of the fruits of their labor. It's criminal. So, our members have sacrificed in the bad times, and we've continued to regress in the good times. So, and, as you said earlier, in the last 10 years, the big three have recognized over $250 billion in profits. And as you've seen by last week's reports, the profits are still going up. Big three CEO pay has been going through the roof, and our worker pay has remained stagnant. So, our key issues in this round of bargaining, ending tiers of our workers is one of the things that we're trying to do. And what those are, for people that don't understand what tiers are, we have temporary workers who make extremely low pay. They have no guarantee they'll ever be full-time. We have workers that hired in. Once you get full-time after you're a temporary worker, you go to full pay, or I'm sorry, it takes you 8 years to get to full pay. So 8 more years of work to get to full pay. So, and then we have our traditional workers who hired in before 2007 that are at full pay, that have pensions, that have post-retirement health care. But the majority of our workers in the big three, more than half at all the big three workers, do not have a pension and do not have post-retirement health care. We're fighting.
Shawn, what you're saying, Shawn, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, you're good.
What you're saying is workers are working side by side.
You bet.
And one guy is making way, way more in wages and benefits than the person doing the same work next to him or her.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And So, and that leads into another big issue is long overdue wage increases. We have regressed in pay in the last 16 years. In 2007, a UAW worker, when they got full time, when they would start their progression, they would start at $19.60 an hour. That same worker today, if you become full time, you start at $18.04 an hour, and that $19.60 back in 2007 is equal to $28 and something today. So we've regressed $10 an hour.
So we're talking about a major wage reduction over that period of time.
Yes. Meanwhile, CEO pay and everybody else profits have skyrocketed. So we've went backwards. And so, pay increases are a huge issue. Cost of living, as we all have experienced this, no matter where you work, no matter what you do. Our cost of living allowance was suspended back during the economic recession 14 years ago. It's still suspended today. So we want that cost of living put back in place. And as it's already talked about, retirement security for the majority of our members. We all know, retirement insecurity is one of the biggest issues facing our country nowadays. And pensions were a great pathway to help with retirement security. And it's shameful, that all the talking heads, all these people that speak so terribly of members and of workers wanting their fair share and wanting to have security at the point that they're, as Walter Reuther would say, too old to work, but too young to die. It's shameful that we're villainized for that. That is those are quality of life issues. Another big issue, of course, job security. And as Michelle and Sarah will be talking to you shortly, they can tell you their experiences. Plants, the big three have closed over 65 plants in the last 20 years. Most of those plant closings have happened in the best of times, not because of sales were down, not because they couldn't afford it, just because they chose to send jobs somewhere else so they can make more money and get more stock buybacks and make more money for themselves. And the workers deserve to have job security. When the company does good, they should do good. Our workers are the ones that build those profits and create those profits. And so, and then part of that job security initiative also is with the EV transition to, battery work and electric vehicles. As it stands right now, we want this to be a just transition. And, we've talked quite a bit about this, and I know, Bernie, you have too. The government, put in place the Inflation Reduction Act, and part of that, there were a lot of incentives for corporations to open battery plants here in America and create jobs here. But what we've recognized so far, what the big three has done, they formed joint ventures with other entities and under the guise of technology, because they want the technology to help do this. But the real reason to me why they've done this is they are circumventing any obligation to the workers. And also,
this is an important point that needs to be emphasized. Taxpayers of this money, correctly, in my view, we are all, I hope, worried about climate change. We want more energy efficiency.
Yep.
We want to move away from fossil fuel. But it seems clear to me, and I think to most people in this country, that when U.S. taxpayer dollars go to help a corporation, that corporation has got to respond by paying its workers decent wages and providing decent benefits. You can't give them money and then have starvation wages. That is just not acceptable.
You bet. And that's the whole issue with where we started out with this EV transition. If you look at the Altium plant in Ohio, they're starting at $16.50 an hour. And it takes 7 years. After 7 years of working there, working with chemicals that aren't even regulated yet, people are vomiting, they're passing out. So there's safety concerns. They're starting at $16.50 an hour, and after 7 years, they go to $20 an hour. And meanwhile,
that is disgraceful. No ifs, buts, and maybes about that.
And meanwhile, the CEO of GM is making, in a week what it takes that worker 16 years to make. So it's criminal. And so we want this to be a just transition. These jobs, if we're gonna have this transition, there has to be a way for the workers to flow into those jobs and keep a good standard of living at good wages and good benefits. And then one of the biggest issues, I think, and I think COVID really brought this to life, but it's work-life balance. And a lot of our workers no matter what company they work for, work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. America, we do lead the world in one thing. We lead the world in working hours and productivity. We work to death like no other country around. And, that leads to people being stressed out, working long hours. I mean, people are working multiple jobs just to make ends meet and to scrape to get by. And those things also, it compounds. It leads to mental health issues. It leads to all kinds of issues. And so it was interesting today. I found a study that was just released today, and it was talking about remote working. And this was actually what I found interesting about this is it was financial people, financial workers, and how they said how remote working has positively impacted their relationships and personal well-being. And an interesting statistic here, it said, was 66% of these people said that if they had to go to work 5 days a week, they would quit their job. And so with this chart, though, it was really sharp and something when you talk about quality of work life. The percentage of these respondents who credited working remotely with improvements in these areas, 75% on average said their relationships with their children was improved by being able to work from home. 65% said their relationship with their partner or spouse had improved. Relationships with their friends, their coworkers, their community, even their managers had improved by over 50%.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but you're absolutely right. I mean, we have a mental health crisis in America. Everybody knows that. We have so many of our people who are overworked, they're exhausted, they can't relate to their spouses, to their kids. And what goes on in the workplace has a lot to do with that. I mean, I think many folks don't know it. A lot of white-collar workers don't know that. You got guys working, what, 6? When I say guys, I mean, in Vermont, we say guys, men and women. That's what we mean.
Yeah.
We're working 6-7 days a week, right? And
you
during
bet.
COVID, I suspect you probably had some pretty crazy hours. Is that right?
Yep, you bet.
Okay. All right. What I want to do now, Shawn, thank you very much. I want to go over to Michelle Collins, a member of UAW Local 977 from Kokomo, Indiana. All right, Michelle, tell us why Shawn is wrong about everything.
Well, he's not wrong about anything.
All right. Glad to hear that.
Yes.
All right. What's going on from your perspective?
From my perspective, well, like Shawn and you both were saying, the mental health crisis. I worked in Tennessee at one time, and we went into what they consider a critical status. So that meant we had to work 90 days solid, straight, no days.
Stop.
Yes.
Stop.
Okay.
Stop. You know why? Because all over this country, there are people who are watching this and they're saying,
yes,
she worked 90 days in a row.
In a row, 12-hour shifts.
Hold it. All right. 1 minute. You're talking about, did you do that yourself?
Yes, I did.
90 days in a row, no days off, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. Is that
no
what you're
days
saying?
off, no excuse, no church. You couldn't have any excuse for a Sunday either. Yes, 90 days.
All right, let me just stop there. I hope everybody hears what Michelle is saying. I don't know how many people could survive. I mean, that is pretty crazy stuff. 7 days a week, 12 hours a day in the middle of what, this is COVID time?
No, it was before COVID. We were in a launch. It was in 2016.
All right. I don't know. You tell me what happens to people's mental health. I could not survive that. I don't know how many people could. What happens to your mental health when you're working 90 days, 12 hours a day?
Well, you really don't have much time for anything at all. You work, you eat, and you sleep. I saw none of my family. I was away from home because I'm originally from Kokomo. My plant was idling down. The second plant I went to had gotten sold out from under us. So I had to go to Tennessee, and it was very lonely. It was a very lonely time. If I didn't have my faith, I don't really know where my mental health would have been, to be honest.
What about some of your coworkers? Were they struggling as well?
Yes, they were struggling. It was very hard to stay up that many hours at work. The difference with me, I was in skilled trades, so I wasn't tied to a line where I was constantly doing the repetition. But we were in a launch though, so everything was an emergency on everything. So we were constantly running. Actually, I had to have shoulder surgery during that time because they wanted us to hurry, get this done. And I was trying to change some filters and my shoulder snapped on me. So yeah, we go through a lot in the factories that a lot of people don't understand. 20, I know they said I had 23 years, but this month at the 19th, I will have 24 years in. I've had 2 carpal tunnel surgeries on my right hand, left hand. I had elbow surgery and both my shoulders have been operated on because of factory work. So
Well,
it wears on you.
You know, thank you for relaying that, because I think most Americans do not believe that in the year 2023 or 2022, whatever it was, that we have working people in this country working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day for 90 days. I doubt that many people actually believe that. It sounds so crazy, but
well, once we got out of the critical status, it still was 6 days that we'd get 1 weekend off a month. And that's pretty common at General Motors.
Well, you know what? I think people hearing that story will tell Shawn, you know what? You ain't asking for enough. They owe you big time.
Right.
All right, Michelle, let me now go to Jermaine, if I might. Jermaine, what's your perspective on what has happened, what's happening, where you would like the union to go, and where you would like the auto companies to be treating workers? Whoop, whoop, whoop. You're on. Can't hear you. There you go.
All right.
I'm sure you made a brilliant statement, but nobody heard it.
All right. So from my perspective, I've been there since 2013. That come up on 10 years this year. So I've been there just over 10 years. Speaking on some of the veteran employee perspective, since I've been there and we had the contract in 2019, these guys have only received $3.50. If you want to add it over 10 years, 35 cents a year. And that's since I've been there. I don't know if they got a raise since before then. We all heard about the 2007 bankruptcy that, the big three went to, and, they went to the American people and was bailed out for that. They also lost COLA, during that time. Most of us, which is myself, the 13th, as we call it in Stellantis, because that's when a big portion of us were hired in, there's no pension. There's no outlook on the future of what's really next for us. Yeah, we have a 401, K, that the company provides 6.4%. But, at the end of the day, is that going to really be enough to sustain and retire on? We also have, guys, like I said, who's been there before that didn't receive their full status and that didn't get a pension, that were from 2001 and 2007 and wasn't granted full-time employment until 2013. So those years they weren't even accredited for. So somebody like myself who only have 10 years, they may have a little bit more seniority than I do, even though they may have 20 some years at the plant. Another thing is, at the plant I'm at now, we have people that was brought in from the Belvedere plant who was uprooted from their families, whether they had, businesses there, whether they had, family there, and some have ultimately had to quit due to the inconvenience of not having family to, help them with their children and things like that. Then we also have TPTs there as well, who sometimes they're there 5 days a week, then they go down to 1 day a week, and they're on this roller coaster ride where, they don't know.
Say that again. So you're working there, and somebody could be told they're going to work 1 day in a week.
With the TBTs, some of them are on 5 days. Then when they really need them, when it's they want their numbers, they're there 5 days a week. Then when they want to slow them down, they're down there 1 day a week, and but they want them to hold this as their primary place of employment. So some of them try to get a second job, and they run into issues with attendance, and they end up getting let go. So, and then they bring in a whole nother group of them, and you watch this cycle repeat itself time and time again, with no future of ever being hired in. So, you see the frustration there, you see the anxiety, the depression, these people not really knowing, what they're going to do. We've had, seniority people even leave because there's no guarantee in the future of what's really next for them there.
Okay.
So.
All right, Jermaine, thanks very much. And now let's hear from Sarah Chambers, who is a member of UAW Local 182 from Livonia, Michigan. She's been with the Ford Company for 17 years, starting off as a temporary worker and then becoming a full-time worker. Sarah, thanks a lot for being with us. So what is your sense of what's going on?
So I think it's important to capture kind of like what Michelle was saying and Jermaine was saying. Fain had mentioned, Shawn had mentioned 8-year growing. Okay. So I hired in 2006 as a full-time temp. I hired in for a new company. That new company walked away in 2008 when the economy took a crash, and we kind of sat in limbo until 2012. My first opportunity to become a full-time employee was in 2012, but I had an option of waiting to see if something opened up in Michigan, which there was no guarantee, go to Chicago or go to Kentucky. I chose to start my career because being a temp, you can't start your life. You don't know what's one day from the next. Can I have a family? Can I buy a house? I couldn't buy a car. I got denied by Ford Motor Credit because I didn't have history of a job, but I was a full-time temp for 6 years at that point. Right. So because my own company said, sorry, you're not eligible. It takes for us that hired in the whole ACH Vistion realm, it took us 16 years to top out to top pay. Last year I got top pay. Been with the company 17 years. That's unacceptable and we need to change that. It's a good job.
Sarah, help us out here. I mean, you were working side by side with other people when you were a quote unquote temp, which is really not the proper word, is it? I mean, you're not a temporary means you're on the job for 2 weeks and you're gone. You're there for how many years did you work as a quote unquote temp?
I was there from November of 2006 until March of 2012 as a full-time temp with no personal time, no benefits, $16.66 an hour until everybody caught up to me in 2013.
Doesn't sound terribly temporary to me to be working at a job for 6 years. That sounds rather permanent to me.
Yeah.
And so you were making wages that really I imagine were hard to get, maintain basic decent standard of living, yeah?
Yeah.
$16 an hour.
So when I moved to Kentucky, a lot of us were in that position where we couldn't get a house. We had to stay in hotels. We had to rent lofts. They wouldn't approve us for loans because we didn't have job history. And a lot of people went and got second jobs in order to live. And we worked at Ford Motor Company. And then on top of that, a lot of us tried to cash out our 401k in order to be able to move because we moved on our own dime. And they told us we couldn't because we were still part of the same company. But they told us that we had to voluntarily quit and rehire because we weren't a part of Ford. But the IRS said that we were.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
right now is like, and I'm a single mom, and we did an article a couple weeks ago, and somebody made a comment about, well, it's not Ford's fault that she's a single mom. That wasn't the point of it. As a single income, which a lot of people in this country now, you have to choose between whether the mom and dad are going to work or not, because daycare is outrageous.
Right.
Sometimes it makes more sense for one person to work, but again, it's still not a living wage at Ford Motor Company, and that's where we're at right now.
Okay. Let me get back to Shawn. Thank you all very much. And anyone jump in at any time, if they want to add something to the discussion. Shawn, I am perceiving, I think the story that these three folks are talking about probably is what many thousands of your members are talking about as well. We're talking about a two-tier system, like a temporary worker for 6 years. We're talking about people who have no retirement benefits. We're talking about people whose jobs have not seen any real wages, but in fact have gone down really substantially. And I want to say something to people out there who are not members of the UAW, who are not members of unions. What these guys are fighting for will impact your life. Because if they, with a strong union, are getting ripped off, you ain't going to get nothing. And if they can fight for decent wages and benefits for their members, that's going to raise the level for the entire working class of this country. So these guys are not only fighting for themselves, they're fighting for every worker in America. Shawn, how did we get into this situation where the CEOs make exorbitant salaries, where the company makes record-breaking profits, and the workers in the automobile industry and real inflation accounted for dollars making less than they did, what, 30, 40 years ago? How did that happen?
Well, I mean, I think it's several factors playing into it, but I mean, naturally, laws changed, things happened. I mean, corporations were allowed to raid pension funds. Then they didn't put the money back in, and then they talked about legacy costs being a problem, and trade laws that are very unbalanced came into play, and naturally, corporations, went to exploit cheaper labor and cheap, countries that have no environmental restrictions and poisoning the environment further. And there's a whole plethora of problems. And on top of that, just to be upfront, I mean, a lot of our leadership in organized labor and the UAW particularly had been complacent. I mean, they rested on the laurels of the Walter Reuther's and the leaders of the past that fought the battles, my grandparents' generation, that changed and raised the standard for everybody. So it's a culmination of several things, but at the end of the day, corporate greed rules the day, and it has for the last 40 years. And it's our obligation, and I say this all the time to our membership and to our leadership. That is our obligation. That's our charge as labor leaders, is to fight this and to fix this, not just for ourselves, but for the entire working class.
That's right. And I remember Shawn mentioned, and many of the viewers will remember, the big fights we had over NAFTA, a permanent normal trade relations with China.
Mm-hmm.
Believe me, I mean, all the unions understood it, and I understood it, and many members of Congress understood it. Didn't take a genius to understand that the function of these terrible trade agreements were to say to corporations, why do you have to pay a worker in America a living wage when you go to China, pay people pennies an hour? Go to Mexico. I remember back then, literally 25 cents an hour. How are you going to compete against that? So for corporations, that's great. That's great. Throw people out on the street. What do you close down? They close down 65 factories, but they're busy opening factories in other parts of the world. True.
Yes.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And it's oh dang it, I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Well, it's outrageous. I mean, Congress shouldn't have allowed that to happen. Corporations push for it. And the bottom line is thousands, not just automobile, but thousands of factories were shut down in America. People thrown out into the streets without, now working for 50% of what they used to work. Communities decimated. That's what those trade agreements did.
So competition was what I was thinking. I lost the word I had in my head for a minute, but competition. You'll hear that a lot from the corporations, and that's code word for race to the bottom. When the corporations talk about being competitive, what they mean is they want to find the lowest bidder, they want to find the cheapest labor somewhere, and then say that we're paid too high and we've got to come down to that standard.
Exactly.
And so that's what has to change. When they talk about being competitive, the corporations are competitive. They've made $250 billion in the last decade, but that's not enough. They still want more. They want to squeeze more blood out of the workers, and they want to exploit workers elsewhere. And so that's what people really have to key in on, because I hear the talking heads say that, if we bargain for these things, the companies won't be competitive. No, they'll be competitive. They'll be profitable, but they just won't be, they won't be able to exploit people and pay people, poverty wages. So that's the goal, is to raise the standard, to negotiate good contracts and raise the standard of everyone else up to that level.
Right, exactly.
Can we get back to negotiating based off the profitability of each company versus what they want to pay us? That's what my goal is.
Mm-hmm. you know, these guys, their greed has no end. And I
Mhm.
think Shawn's point of a moment ago is exactly the right point. They essentially want American workers to compete with desperate people. I'll never forget this. Years ago, I went to Mexico as part of a congressional delegation. Never forget this. It wasn't auto industry. It was electrical. I think it was General Electric.
Mhm.
And you go to this place near the border, not far from the border, and you see these beautiful new factories. And it was not just American companies, European companies, beautiful factories. And the workers there, honest to God, you know, these, when you get a refrigerator, it comes in a cardboard box. They were living literally in those boxes, making maybe 25 cents an hour, working in these beautiful new factories. And that's what the goal is. That's the race to the bottom,
You bet.
you know, and we cannot allow that. We got to raise the wages of poor people around the world, not lower wages in America. All right.
That's, as I tell people, my grandparents' generation, my grandparents came from extreme poverty in Tennessee and Kentucky back in the, during the Depression. And, moving north and getting a union job at GM and Chrysler changed their lives. It was, and when people talk about people from Mexico and other countries, I don't view them any differently than I did my grandparents. My grandparents were lucky that they were born in America and they migrated north to get better jobs. There's no difference in their plight and the plight of people that are destitute in Mexico trying to do the same thing. And so, we've got to raise that standard everywhere.
Jermaine, why don't you jump in? How are your coworkers, feeling about their job situation now? What do they want to see?
Of course, they want to see the increase in wages. They want the pension. Like I said, there's a lot of uncertainty into their future. You got some of the retirees that, even some of the people that I've known that have retired, they always ask, what's going to be in the contract? Is there going to be anything in there for the retirees? Because as we know, as they talk about inflation, things have gone up from food to gas to the even cost of living. The market rate for housing has gone up. You have parents that can't afford daycare. So, and it just adds to the anxiety, the frustration, and where people literally have had to walk away from their employment. So it's either the employment or their family. They have to make that decision.
Sarah or Michelle, I can't remember who made the point. I think it was Michelle made the point about childcare and the
Right.
cost of childcare, and making the point that sometimes, given the fact, on average in America, it costs $15,000 a year for a kid in childcare. So who can afford? If you're making $40,000 a year, how are you going to afford childcare?
You can't. Not with taxes, market rate rent, the cost of groceries, and just, like I said, gas has went up tremendously. So,
Right.
You just can't.
You can't. It's harder and harder to raise a family. How do your coworkers feel about, Shawn was talking about the CEOs getting big fat salaries, companies making record-breaking profits, and yet the companies continue to try to squeeze workers. How do your colleagues get upset about that? Are they resigned to it? How do they feel?
Honestly, their theories. Like I said, when we talk about them, say the veteran employees, they've given up great concessions as, like I said, when they were there for the 2007 bankruptcy, and literally the workers carried the companies on their backs, and still, continued to make their products and brought them to where they are at today, to these record-breaking profits. But now it's their turn to, pay these people back as the people help bail them out of their situation. Now they want to go play hide the piggy bank. So, they talk about, what they have constantly lost over the years, as far as wages, COLA, some of them have, they've given up, like I said, their wages, and it's like the company doesn't want to give it back. They have this reason. Well, oh, we have this, we have that, we have this, and it's. I mean, they're ready for the fight to get back what they've earned and what they deserve.
If necessary, you think they're prepared to go out on strike?
I mean, they're prepared. I mean, they have done nothing but lost over the last decade or so. So it's like at this point, I mean, one of the big questions is what are we going to give up next? Not what are we going to get, what are we going to have to give up next? Because they're so used to losing over the past, like I said, who knows how long, but you hear about the losses that they've had to take, and well, what's going to be next? They've taken this, they've taken that, but you hear about the profits that they're bragging about, that they've made, but they haven't given back what they've taken from us, and all you want to do is take.
I want everybody to understand what Jermaine is talking about. We talk about COLAs, cost of living adjustments. You can make, in recent years, we've seen pretty high inflation. So you can get a 3 or 4% increase in your wages. Hey, that's pretty good. And yet if inflation is 5%, if you live in a community where housing is really high, childcare is very high, guess what? You got a 3 or 4% wage increase and you're further behind. Mm-hmm. You're in worse shape than you were. And that's why this COLA thing is so important. Michelle, Sarah, you want to jump in, add anything that we haven't gone over?
Yes, I would love to. Job security, that's a very big concern of mine. As my local president, Dave Walker, said the other day, this EV coming up, the EVs, the electric vehicles, it's the beginning of the end if we don't secure that job security for our future generations. Yep. I'm scared. I'm terrified for my children and my grandchildren. This is a very important issue that we're looking at here, and that's a big concern. Other than I agree with Jermaine about the pay increases, our COLA. These are things that my coworkers are concerned with as well. And when Sarah was talking about being a temp, I worked with a temp. I worked with several temps, but one in particular, his name was Johnny. He worked for 5 years at General Motors, right beside each one of us. He came in every day. Now, keep in mind, temps were only allowed 5 days off a year. They could not miss. Now, I'm not talking they didn't have to work every day, but if they couldn't have a day off, if they got sick, they had to come to work. If their child was sick, they had to come to work. They were only allowed 5 excused days a whole year. Well, Johnny came in every day. He had a smile on his face. He was an awesome coworker. We all really liked him. And in 2015, he was really excited because in his heart, he felt, and so did we, thought that he was going to be hired in full time with that contract. But all of a sudden that summer, they let all the temps go. And we couldn't understand why, because he pretty much worked 9 months out of the year. They only let the temps go during the winter time, and he would be back again come spring. And we didn't understand why. And when you look at that contract in 2015, you had to be, as a temp, you had to be there at General Motors within 90 days of the contract being ratified. So you get rid of all the temps. 2015, they're like, okay, we'll make the temps in progression employees. Well, if the temps aren't there in that 90-day time frame, they had to start all over again. And I left to go down to Spring Hill, Tennessee, shortly after that contract was ratified. I didn't know whatever happened to Johnny. I did hear that they did call him back as a temp again, but he is now a police officer. He ended up just giving up General Motors work and went and found another line of
right. You raise an interesting question about job security. And I want to throw this out to Shawn or anybody else. There is great concern about the impact of artificial intelligence and robotics on what it means to the workforce. I just out of curiosity, do you guys have many robots, Shawn, in the factories?
I can speak on that right now too. At my plant, I work in a facility. We take we bring in rolls of sheet metal and we stamp them out. It means they go between these two presses and they form body parts like fenders, doors, hoods, and such. So they announced that they have invested a bunch of money in our plant, and everyone's excited. Come to find out, construction's going on right now. There's going to be a big press put in place. The thing is, it's going to eliminate about 10 jobs, because not only will the press automatically by robots set the dies in place, it will also unload the product, and they'll have these little robots that'll pull the racks away, and all a truck driver just has to come in and load it into the trains. So that is we're seeing that happen right now. Automation, yes, it's horrible.
We can't, there's been a huge influx of automation over the years, and with, there's robots in every factory, it goes back, even again, I go back to Ruther back in the 40s and 50s talking about, we can't let technology master us. We have to master technology. And it shouldn't lead to, basically we should be training workers, getting more workers mapped into skilled trade careers, and working on robots and things like that. That's the key to this. And then also, the companies have used technology as a way to cut jobs, and instead of interjecting robots and technology to make our jobs easier. And so that's the big difference in this, of what we experienced.
I mean, anyone else want to jump in on artificial intelligence or robotics?
Yeah. So like it goes back to Walter Reuther talking about when they first started bringing automation in. He looked at Henry Ford and said, well, who's going to buy your product? Because they can't buy it. And we're at that point right now where even a 17-year employee, I had to lease a vehicle because I can't afford my own product that I built.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know if I can keep going on other stuff. The companies had a plan to divide and conquer, I believe, all along. And they, at one point, they did a really good job. I see a lot of the members coming together and understanding that it's not just about Sarah that was wrong for 17 years needs to get everything that she deserved in the past 2 decades. Sarah deserves that, and all the 29,000 employees that are in the same boat as me, but also those top tier employees, top wage employees that have a pension, they deserve back what they gave up in order for us to have a job. We have to bridge that gap and come together and all be one, instead of all this division that keeps going on. We don't get retirement. We get a 401k, 6.4% matched by the company. When I retire, I walk into HR and I say, hey, I've been here for 30 years. I want to retire. They'll hand me a piece of paper that says I voluntarily quit and I want to release my pension, my 401k. That's unacceptable. Those are the things that need to change.
So just touch on the animation, as people know, you heard about the electric vehicles and things of that nature. One of the things you always hear, that it takes less manpower to build these vehicles. Why? They don't have as many moving parts, such as things like engines, transmissions, drivetrains, and things like that. But you hear the company talk about is less profitable, but however, it doesn't take as many manpowers, which, moving towards the EV sector, you're cutting your manpower in order to build one of these vehicles, but yet the price of these vehicles aren't going down. So how do you do the math where you say they're not as profitable, but your, wage cost is down because you're not using as many men put these vehicles together? So, and that's the thing. So we see the job cuts, we see the robots come in, some simple as, the ACGs, we see them doing the test drives with the, some of the trucks, and it's like, people see this as, that's my job. If this come here, that's my job. And as a union member, you have to fight to, keep that autonomous stuff out to protect your job. So, but the company wants it because it reduces man hours, it reduces labor, and they feel these robots can run all night, even though it takes a man to repair these robots. So.
Well, I think it gets back to, Shawn quoting Walter Reuther, who was right. We cannot allow the technology to run our lives. Technology is not a bad thing if we benefit from it. It's a good thing.
Right.
If the factory becomes more productive, the workers should benefit about it. We could reduce the work day, right? What's wrong with that? But it shouldn't be just machines pushing workers out on the street. It should be machines benefiting all of us with higher wages, working fewer hours, and so forth. But Shawn, I think, are you guys dealing with this whole issue of robotics and artificial intelligence? Is that
we've been dealing with the technology issue, and really the key right now is this battery, the EV transition, because there are currently there are around 9 plants in the big three being built and one that's up and running right now. And so, you know, we have to bring that work up to our master agreement standards. And that's the reason that is a key is because there are 29 battery plants right now in America being planned. So, and not just with the big three, but with several other companies. So it's important that we set a standard there that everyone will benefit from, and not let a standard get established where it's paying poverty wages. That's the risk here, because if it's poverty wages, you know, if we bring this work in the big three under our standards, that's going to help us get those standards established in the other places. So there will be places for people to fall. So it has to be a just transition.
Okay, we've covered a lot of territory. Is there anything that anyone would like to say that we didn't discuss? Sarah,
I would
Michelle,
I would just say, we do have an online petition for everyone to show support. There should be a QR code on the screen that will take you to it. And oh gosh, excuse me, I've been talking too much. Sorry. But you know, our message to the big three is really simple. It's been that record profits mean record contracts, and so we're asking people to sign that petition to help us tell the big three that it's time for them to pay up. And if people are feeling really inspired, we also have a way for them to call and leave a voice message for the big three CEOs. You know, as we've said before, they've been lavished with 40% pay increases over the last few years, and we know our members are worth the same and more. So if you get a chance, give them a ring. That phone number is 318-300-1249. And really, for me, just to close, I just want to say, you know, we've said this over and over. This is our generation's defining moment to turn the tide and bring back the middle class. And so I'm very happy to say that we are organized and the UAW members are ready to fight, and we are back in the fight. So appreciate the time, and again, appreciate any support we can get from anyone all over the country.
All right, well, Shawn, let me thank you, and not only for being with us tonight, but for your leadership and your helping to revitalize the UAW. And we thank Michelle, Jermaine, and Sarah for participating as well. And I would say to everybody in this country, their fight is our fight. If the automobile companies can crush these guys, cannot give them a good contract, every worker in America suffers as a result. So our job is to stand with them in their struggle. They will stand with others who are also standing up in struggle. That's what solidarity is about. That's what the union movement is about. So guys, thank you so much for being with us. Best of luck, and we'll stand with you in the months to come. Thank you.
Thank you.